Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Recovery After Stroke. Before we jump into today's incredible interview, I wanted to share a quick update. My book, The Unexpected Way That a Stroke Became the Best Thing That Happened, has now sold over 400 copies and continues to receive amazing feedback. If you are on your own recovery journey or supporting someone who is, this book offers hope, insight, and encouragement for finding meaning and growth after stroke. You can find it at recoveryafterstroke.com/book or on Amazon by typing my name, Bill Gassiamas, into the search bar. Now, let's talk about today's episode. If you've ever wondered what is possible in stroke recovery, even years after your stroke, this is the episode for you. Today, I'm joined by Brodie Jackson, a neuro rehabilitation expert and a kinesiologist from Neuro Peak Performance in Canada. The clinic Brody works in is one of the world's leading providers of the Helius PoNS Device, a fascinating neurostimulation tool that's helping stroke survivors around the world walk again, regain balance, and reconnect with parts of themselves they thought were lost. Brody shares what the PoNS device actually is, how it works, and why it is not just about balance, it's about rewiring the brain using targeted neuroplasticity based therapy. We also dive into the emotional side of recovery and the small, powerful wins that fuel long term success. And if the PoNS device sounds familiar, it might be because you've heard my interview with Cheryl Schiltz, the very first person to ever use a technology that led to the creation of the device. That's episode 200, and it's a must listen if you're curious about what's possible when it comes to rewiring the brain after injury. You're going to love this conversation. It's packed with inspiration, real world rehab results, and hope for what's still possible no matter where you are in your journey. Let's dive in. Brodie Jackson, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bill.
Now, forgive me for asking, but how did we meet? Who introduced us?
So I believe you reached out to me via a patient and his wife, who I've been speaking to for quite some time about entering our clinic, and kind of just through conversation back and forth of especially going to engage in our PoNS program. And from there, I guess they reached out to you. I probably presume wanting maybe more questions or more answers. And then it just kind of organically made its way back to me. So
Exactly. All right. Thank you for the reminder. Sometimes
no
I
worries.
struggle to fit the pieces. I get a lot of people requesting guests. I get a lot of people requesting to be on the show. So it makes it a little bit challenging. Now, we're going to talk about what the PoNS is in a minute. But before we talk about what the PoNS device is, I'd love you to tell the listeners a little bit about your background, the kind of work that you do, a little bit about your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Brodie Jackson. So I am a kinesiologist. I'll say that on paper, but really, especially in Canada, we wear a lot of different hats. But I specifically specialize in neuro rehabilitation rehab. So I work for a clinic. We actually just recently changed our name. We are now called Neuro Peak Performance and Physiotherapy here in Surrey, British Columbia, Canada, which is just outside of Vancouver, about half an hour out. We used to be called the Surrey Neuroplasticity Clinic, which I believe if you start to look online, you'll see a lot more of that name floating around. Um, we deal with all things the brain. So our clinic is kind of a multi-sprung kind of company. We have kind of three different heads. We've got our clinical trials division, which is called our CNS. We've got the clinic, which is us. And then we also have our own proprietary medical device called the NeuroCatch, which ultimately scans brain function. So from there, we kind of went into this really cool realm of assess, test, and then implement. And that's kind of what our bleed of our company's been. And we focused around all things brain. So everything from, run of the mill, low level kids playing sports concussions, all the way up through traumatic brain injuries, MS, Parkinson's, strokes, and a lot of the off label or kind of the more or less mystery situations and everything in between. So We kind of see a little bit of everything every day, but really we try to strive towards using a lot of evidence-based and technology-based product and in assessment and intervention to be able to give us a much more non-biased and objective way of treating the various ailments. So we've got a huge team on our roster of kinesiologists, physiotherapists, occupational therapists. We run with counselors. A lot of our kins and our physios do the bulk of the work. Like I said, we wear a lot of different hats. And it's allowed us to do a lot of really cool things with a lot of special individuals. So that's kind of how we've really been. Our goal is to obviously treat people, mainly for the brain and find new ways to get them better. And then one of the main things that we've obviously been using here is the PoNS. So the PoNS is not our product. It is a product from a company called Helius. So they are an American-based company. There's been PoNS users all over the world now. It is a very cool device. I have it with me here, so I don't know if people will see me on video or not, but this is what it
Yeah,
looks like.
they will. Okay. So
So I
what we've
will
got,
walk people through that after,
yeah, lift it up for a sec. Let's hold it there for a little bit. I'll make you
of
feel
course.
uncomfortable. So it looks like um uh overgrown set of glasses um from the back. And then how would you put it on your head? What would it look like when you're wearing it properly?
Yeah, so as I put it on, so you can see it's got a fairly flexible collar. It's very user friendly. It was originally designed for people with TBIs, so it was ultimately supposed to be very simple to use. Flexible, you wear it around your neck, and on with the collar itself, it will be connected to a mouthpiece. And that mouthpiece, this is our demo device. I'm not actually going to put it in my mouth, but it does sit inside your mouth on top of your tongue. And it does send stimulation through your tongue, which will travel through into our brainstem and essentially stimulate our cerebellum, which our cerebellum is our movement cortex of our brain. And from what research tells us, is the fastest way to get into the brain to elicit something very special called neuroplasticity, which is the way the brain changes itself and can heal. So I'm sure many of your users have maybe read, maybe you've heard of Norman Doidge. He's very famous in the brain health world. The Way the Brain Changes Itself is one of his more famous books. It talks very extensively on the PoNS. So a lot of that neuroplastic and neuromodulation stimulation has been developed through that, and we get to see it firsthand here. Um,
Awesome. Love it. So
Very cool.
the reason I know about um the reason this all came about now, all I'm starting to put all the pieces together, is that somebody reached out to me, wanted to know if I had interviewed somebody who had used that device, the PoNS device. And what I've actually done is I've interviewed Cheryl Schiltz, who was number one person who used the very first device in the 1990s after her um, whole inner ear was destroyed by some medication due to a medical intervention that she needed. And as a result of having her inner ear damaged and destroyed, she wasn't able to walk, have any balance. All she had was a spinning room and what do they call it? When everything's moving around you all the time,
Vertigo.
vertigo all the time. And she happened to, even under those really extreme conditions, sign up to a course to go to the University of Madison, Wisconsin, and do a course on some topic that she was interested in. And by some stroke of absolute miracle, um, Paul Bucky Reeder and his team were working at the University of Madison, Wisconsin, developing tools for neuroplasticity. Paul Bacurita, for example, helped somebody who was blind, completely blind, shoot baskets into a garbage can um, with a device that was sort of mimicking vision on his forehead. And then Cheryl has this device that they design. They put it in a gyroscope. They put a gyroscope on a helmet on her head, and then they attach this probe thing. She puts it on her tongue, and then with training, that stimulates the neuroplasticity to, in her words, retrain the tongue to know where Cheryl was in the world, to give her a sense of balance back, to kind of rewire her inner ear to the back of her tongue to tell her how to balance. And then lo and behold, she's the first person who proves the theory. And then from there, we have the opportunity to develop the devices, and now they look like the one that you put around your neck. Now, for people watching and listening, Cheryl is a must watch episode. It's an absolutely must watch episode. It's episode 200. And I cannot stress how important it is that you watch that episode if you're interested in regaining your balance after a cerebellar stroke, or you have some other inner ear problems or some other issues related to your stroke. Now, um, do you know about Cheryl Schiltz, Brody? Let's take a quick break here from this incredible conversation with Brody to remind you about two powerful tools you can use right now in your stroke recovery journey. First, if you haven't picked up my book yet, The Unexpected Way That a Stroke Became the Best Thing That Happened, I encourage you to do so. It is filled with honest reflections and practical strategies from someone who's been there, me, and the other people who I interviewed to help me write the book. Over 400 copies have already been sold, and it continues to help survivors navigate the physical, mental, and emotional challenges of life after stroke. You can grab your copy at recoveryafterstroke.com/book. Second, if you're looking for guidance in your recovery, whether you're just starting out or hitting a plateau, visit recoveryafterstroke.com/learn. There you'll find some self-paced video lessons and resources designed specifically for stroke survivors and caregivers. All right, let's get back to Brody and learn more about how the Helius PoNS device is giving people a second chance at mobility, balance, and confidence.
Yeah, so I've heard kind of vague rumbles of it early on as I was kind of getting into neuro rehab. And then as you know, as we started to learn about the pawns, we learned of, a lot of their background stuff through their work in Russia, and then obviously through some of their inter stuff through, Wisconsin. And then you start to dive down into the neuroplasticity and kind of the history of it. And I've read little antidotes, and I haven't heard your podcast with her actually, so I'd be very interested myself to actually give this a whirl on that as well. So I will look into that.
It's a phenomenal podcast. She's such a lovely lady, and she takes you through the entire story of how she lost her inner ear, how she regained it, and how it changed her life. It's just absolutely amazing. I couldn't believe that I was interviewing her because I reached out just by fluke, like you do with all the people that you want to have on the podcast. And she said yes, and I couldn't believe it. Uh, and she's still doing work in that space. She still has um, an interest in that area, and it's well worth looking into. So, your client or your potential client contacted me and said, "Do you know anyone about who has used the ponds?" I said, "No, but I know the first person who ever developed the theory and the device to get it to where it is today." And what I suppose I wanted to do was, since we couldn't talk about, um, since I didn't know anyone, I thought maybe you could talk about some people who have used the ponds. But before we talk about them, I want to know what kinesiology is, because I've had the pleasure of having some kinesiology um, done with me, and it's amazing. And I don't get it, but I love it. So I'd love for you to describe in your own words what kinesiology is and how people use it to benefit.
Yeah, so being a kin, it's very different across different regions, especially different countries. The core competency of it is it's essentially the active approach of human movement. I would say up in Canada, we're very similar to physios, but we just don't do like I would say more or less a physio, but a lot bigger, more of an active component. So we're still treating, we're still assessing. We're still doing hands-on work. We're still doing a lot of the things that a physiotherapist would do, but we are going to be guiding it with a lot more movement-based and activity and strengthening, a little more of the like the exercise component. And in terms of like kind of what you'll see in our clinic, we're a lot more balance and gait specialized. We do a lot more specific to the ailments, but a lot of us have, vestibular specialization training, ocular training, a lot of those things that assume that a physio only could do, a lot of us will do as well and can. It's just there's a little bit more of an active component. In other countries, like I know in the US, it's a little different. It's a little bit more exercise only driven, and then I'm not too sure what it looks like in your part of the world, but I would assume it's probably very similar, where it's a lot more exercise therapy driven. But at least for us here, that's kind of what it looks like.
It seems like it's probably a broad.
It is fairly broad, yes.
So when I've had kinesiology, basically, my chiropractor uses it to test where he needs to work, and he does the resistance tests of my leg, of my arms, and what have you, and then from there he somehow knows how to follow that back to a particular part of the spine, and then work there. Like I
Yeah.
completely, totally don't get it, but I see the result because he does a test. My hand doesn't stay up, and then he does something on my back, and then he goes back, tests the hand, and then the hand stays up and responds. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
so interesting, and it's like he's working on on circuits and switching circuits on and off. Well, on. He's trying to switch them on, actually, not off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all about just isolating, different limitations and deficits. And from there, you can reverse kind of engineer backwards of what might be causing that or might be creating that implication. And you just work through it that way. And that's kind of the ethos of, what a kinesiologist is going to do is we're assessing what those limitations or those deficits are. And that's why I always say no patient is the same. Everyone gets a unique assessment, whether it is balance or gait or vestibular or strength or muscular, whatever that is you're not treating let's say it's a stroke. You're not just saying I'm treating a stroke and blanketing it as a stroke. You're treating what that individual's specific limitations are that are very specific to that person. So it's dystonia or it's increased tone or it's spasticity or it's a gait deviation or it is a balance issue. It's as we know with, there's different kinds of strokes that elicit very different limitations. And as we know, no stroke is the same. So that's where we approach that. And that's the beautiful thing with, physical therapy and active therapy specifically, is we're there to treat the limitation and make those gains that way.
Hmm. All right, let's talk about the ponds a little bit. So, when did you first come across it?
Yeah, so I came across it as I was actually interviewing to join this team about 4 and a bit years ago. And what's pretty cool now is myself and my co-clinician, Matthew Gagnon, we're actually probably the two most seasoned pond users in the world. So, a quick little side note is our clinic actually did a lot of Helios's initial research and a lot of their clinical trials. So, through that, we got very blessed at being one of their kind of key locations. If you actually look up our clinic, there's a big thing on Montel Williams using it with his MS. And that was all done at our clinic. He came and traveled through, and there's a lot of stuff on, the Sur Neuroplasticity Clinic and Pons itself. So we got very lucky to use it a lot. And so since then, like we've been Helios's biggest, one of their biggest locations for Pons usage. Like we see, oh man, there's been times where we've seen almost triple digits of individuals in a year come through using it, whether it's been through clinical trials or through private patients. So
Mhm.
definitely a lot. And then myself and Matthew, like I said, we've been here the longest and we've used it with pretty much everybody. So we got a lot of experience. So even though I say, I've only been around it for 4 and a bit years, I have seen a very, very, very large number of PoNS patients. and I've been very blessed to see kind of what it's been able to do and what it's done for people.
Wow. Okay, let's talk the nitty-gritty, and then we'll get that out the way, and then we'll talk about the therapy. What does it cost to access the ponds, to use the ponds? How does it all work?
Yeah, so it's I'll be pretty frank, it's not the most inexpensive thing ever. It will be in Canadian dollars. So sometimes for our American neighbors down south, with the Canadian dollar not doing too good, sometimes it's a bit of a deal for them. But I know with the Australian dollar and us, we're kind of very similar right now. It ends up being about, so we get it straight from Helius. So I don't want to necessarily state too many prices publicly just because other
Uh,
clinics and facilities do use it and they may
no, no,
use
I'm just
other
talking
price
about
points.
accessing the service rather than the
Yeah,
pond. Yeah.
absolutely. So the way it works, in Canada at least, is so usually originally when Pawns came out, I'll make it kind of simpler and I'll spread back out. When Pawns first came on board, it was originally kind of just an on-label device for TBIs and MS. So TBIs as in traumatic brain injuries, MS as in multiple sclerosis. So between those two deficits, that was what all the research was done on, and that's kind of what things were put through. For whatever reason, Helios could only get the full green light completely in Canada. So we were able to see patients very quickly and right away. Yes, they're American-based company, but they could only get clearance with MS, and you had to get a doctor's assessment. It was a whole, you had to jump through a lot of hoops in America to be able to utilize it. And I know it's the same kind of deal in Australia as well, I believe, especially under the MS banner. Versus here in Canada, anybody could have access to it if you essentially wanted to do it because it's a private tool usage. So from there, it then expanded onto we could start taking off-label patients. So we could, if you weren't just limited to having TBIs or MS, if you had any form of a brain injury or a neuro-based deficit, so Parkinson's, strokes, functional movement disorders, and chronic migraines, vestibular concerns, or vertigo, you were able to use it up here. So it allowed a lot of people from out of country, and across Canada specific coming to our facility to use it. Um, so it was pretty easy is because there were no barriers, at least for us, is if you reached out and you were like, I want to do this, or I've done my own research, it could get done. Versus it was a lot more of a process in Australia, in the United States, and for sure in Europe, which was almost impossible over there. So that's where we've been able to intake a lot of people, to kind of skip those barriers.
I don't get why it's so hard to access. The thing like looks like the most non-invasive thing you could ever possibly do. You pop it on your neck and you put it in your mouth and you're done. I mean, it's like
Yeah, there's a lot of
ridiculous.
contraindications. That's why, and that's mainly because since you're sending stimulation into your tongue intro like orally, there's risks of potential. If you have a tumor, if you've got implants, if you've got other or histories of oral cancer, those can be significant contraindications to using the device. So there needs to be obviously clearance from FDA, Health Canada, or your various health governing bodies of everybody clearing it. And I think that's where the limitations have been. And because, there haven't been enough populations of various deficits and situations to use it, they can't comfortably say fully good to go. And I think that's been the issue in the United States with mainly the FDA.
Mm.
With Health Canada, though, however, we've been able to get stroke added to the label, which was absolutely fantastic about a year and a half ago. And then we're pretty close. I mean, I would be shocked if we see Parkinson's added soon as well. Just because we've been able to run enough clinical trials up here, we've been able to use it enough up here. So that list keeps growing of promising research, which has been fantastic.
Okay. So what I like about it is there's a whole bunch of clinical trials going on in the background that is trying to determine the efficacy of this thing, and then also trying to understand its what's the word? Its side effects. It's does it have is that the right word? Side
I
effects
I
or
wouldn't necessarily say side effects. I
yeah.
mean, I've only had one individual maybe abuse the device, so to speak, where maybe their neurological system was a little bit more heightened for too long, which obviously, when we're in a heightened state for too long, can lead to a series of neuroinflammatory reactions,
Wow.
which was not permanent. It was just that individual needed to do a lot more down regulation work, and we needed to kind of coach them on how often they could use the device. But in terms of those
Um,
contraindications,
More
it's
more is not necessarily better.
no.
Dosage is really important.
Yeah, because what's happening is because you're stimulating your brain, you're basically raising your nervous system. So the way I kind of describe the use of the pawns is because we're stimulating into that cerebellum, so into that movement cortex of the brain, you're basically opening up again the ability to neuroplasticity. And what I described to most people when I explained what on earth is neuroplasticity is our brain is like a sponge. So when we're born, when we're a baby, up until we're definitely into our late teens or early 20s, if we notice, and for a lot of people maybe listening, they can admit to this or they watch their kids, their grandkids grow up, is year over year, kids get progressively smarter and more advanced. And there's a sponge for knowledge. Every year you see these crazy milestones. That's that brain's ability to intake information and morph and change and grow. It starts to slow down, or it's usually around 25 years old. And then that kind of that ability to intake information at a rapid rate stays kind of stagnant up until our, usually mid 50s or early 60s. And then the brain's ability to undergo neuroplasticity starts to slow down. Doesn't mean your brain is degrading, it just means that it's going to take you longer to learn something. So I always say, you could take a 5-year-old and a 70-year-old who've both never played piano before, and there's a very good chance that 5-year-old might learn faster than the 70-year-old. It's just how the brain intakes information. What the pawns does is no matter who or the deficit itself is it puts that brain back into that neuroplastic state that we might have seen when we were in, a young adulthood or in our teenager phase, where that brain is able to intake content. So we pair that with very extensive targeted physical therapy or very targeted, maybe cognitive therapy or dexterity, anything that's going to challenge the brain to adapt or advance or tackle a potential deficit or limitation. That's what we pair that with the pawns. And because the brain's in a very spongy state, it's going to learn these patterns at a more efficient rate.
Okay. But more is not necessarily better.
No,
Very
because
important.
again, if you're constantly up here, there's a there's risks that brain is just not going to learn because it's like going to the gym every day. There's no value at pushing hard 7 days a week in the gym. Your brain can't recover. So in
Yeah.
that case, your body won't recover, right?
Yeah. Okay. Understood. All right. That's really good to know, actually. Um, so people are not buying the device. What they're doing is they're buying access to it or rehabilitation in your organization. So is there a program that they need to uh, do? Is there a minimum number of uh, doses? How does it actually work? Like, how does somebody engage in that kind of therapy?
Yeah, so super easy. So technically they do own the device when they buy it. They have to buy it through the clinic. Though you get the collar and the mouthpiece. However, the mouthpiece itself is only active for 98 days, so 14 weeks. And then when that mouth, and I'll get back to kind of what the program looks like, but when the mouthpiece expires, then they have the choice if they want to purchase another mouthpiece only, they can, and then we can reactivate that mouthpiece attached to the collar. They can continue use. So I have people that have been using it nonstop for years, and they just buy new mouthpieces every 14 weeks. Now,
Why does it stop? Why does it stop working?
I believe that's what Helius, when they did their research, when they did the clinical trials, a lot of their trials were done over 14-week periods. And I'm not entirely certain, but I assume that's probably where when they maybe found that the big leaps of gains would start to slow down around that 14-week mark. I've still had people using it years later that still make gains, but the gains you see usually on the device from weeks 1 through 14 are pretty significant if the individual is appropriate for the use of the device. So it's just the way they've set that up. Now, the other theories that they've talked about is that the mouthpiece itself may degrade over time with constant usage in your mouth. So these are
Okay.
gold electrodes and built in with copper and a bunch of other stuff. So I think they also feel that wearing this thing for 2 to 3 hours a day, every day for 14 weeks would potentially wear down the mouthpiece.
Right.
So that would be those are our two overreaching theories as to why there's a timer built in.
Right. And then I would imagine that if it wears down the mouthpiece, then it's not as effective, but also
Correct.
you're getting potentially parts of the mouthpiece entering your mouth, and you
It's
really
a
want to,
safety thing. Yeah,
yeah,
you're not potentially not getting an efficient product, nor you're potentially also risking just stuff breaking down that you don't want.
yeah.
Um, so what they do usually, so the way the program works is you'd purchase the device, it's active for 98 days. Usually you would come, at least how we do it. Again, different clinics and facilities may do this differently. How we do it and how we kind of mirrored it around what Helius wanted to do with their PoNS device is they come to our clinic. Obviously, we would do an assessment head to toe to determine what their deficits or limitations are. They would then be in our clinic for usually 2 weeks, generally, where they would do two 90-minute sessions a day. So they're doing 3 hours of therapy a day. From there, usually, depending on where they live or kind of what they want, most people for those weeks, kind of 3 through 14, they would do a lot of the therapy on their own at home with the guidance of a program we'd provide, and then they would check in with us once a week, whether it was in clinic or virtually. And then obviously the way we do it at our clinic is it's very flexible, so people can stay here longer if they're out of town, or they can come in multiple times a week during weeks 2 through 14. It's really up to them what they're comfortable with and what we want to determine. Some people are more independent than others and may need a little bit more support, so they like coming in a bit more. Others, they're very comfortable with doing their program on their own.
Yeah. Now, in that time, are they, does the device gather any data? Does it have any other information that you can get out of it? How does
Yeah,
it,
so
or is it just,
yes, the data that it absorbs, so I can do data downloads on my computer. It's honestly more or less an accountability tool, so it can tell me how much you're using it, how much time it's been sitting on your tongue, the percentage of how good the tongue contact's been as well.
uh-huh.
So I can kind of use that to check in and be like, okay, tongue contact time looks great. Or in the reverse, it doesn't look good. You haven't been using it. It's hanging out of your mouth too much. We need to change this in order so you can get out of the experience what you need. So it's more or less an accountability tool that the data it'll collect. Um, because the other thing too is so with the pawns, usually we try to aim for about 120 minutes of stimulation a day. So each pawn session is 20-minute cycles at a time.
Mhm.
So you're not just wearing it for 3 hours straight. You're usually doing 20 minutes of gait training, possibly, then 20 minutes of balance, maybe 20 minutes of a movement control or other things. And then it does technically cap out at 200 minutes in a day. So some people will do extra stuff. Or in session, if we're ripping through, we might add in extra sessions in clinic. Or at home, I might give you some homework to do in the evenings, maybe some meditations, some cognitive work, or which I've done for a lot of my stroke patients. I've been really getting into doing a lot more dexterity work with like writing tools and typing tasks and a lot of like fine motor skill stuff. And so I'll maybe give that to them at home. But that's kind of
So,
how the device is kind of built for their time frame.
okay, so I was under the impression that the Pons is really mainly about regaining somebody's balance, but you're talking about fine motor skills and dexterity kind of results. So tell me how how it's moved on from being just that device that helps to support the or regain the person's balance.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the early research mainly was to do with, it's both static and dynamic balance that eventually bled into ambulation. Because as you know, if we have no balance, obviously gait's going to be impacted as well. So that's where a lot of the research was originally done. But when we think about the theory and concept of neuroplasticity and how the brain, learns, is really anything that can challenge that neurological system. Why wouldn't there be a green light to pair that with PoNS? So I think that might be what maybe separates our clinic a little bit differently from maybe other clinics. I'm not too sure. But we started to, again, as I talked earlier, especially because we can take on a lot more off-label clients, we started to do specific to them what their deficits are. We were combining it with PoNS. And from there, we were starting to see some success. So obviously, we don't have like hardcore, like concrete data to like publish a paper and say like, yeah, it improves hand function necessarily. But we were putting them through their neurological rehab like we would a normal client, and we were combining it with PoNS, and we were starting to see results. And I think that was a big breakthrough for us and what made us a lot different to get people to where they needed to be.
Oh man, I love that. But I thought we were just going to talk about the balance stuff, and this is way better, way more um, possibility for people to access it for very different reasons and in the same kind of way. So, what now? You must get people who get results, right? What are those conversations like, Brody? So they're at home or they're accessing the clinic, whatever they're doing, but at some stage they're noticing results. How does that conversation go? Because that would be pretty freaky. When I remember myself, like I'm in rehab. I didn't use a PONS or anything like that, but I'm in rehab, and I'm noticing, my leg is coming online, and I'm noticing my arm is coming online, and I'm picking things up, and I'm taking steps without anybody holding me, and it's really exciting and uh, rewarding. So, what are those conversations like with your patients?
Man, the milestones you get to cross and reach with your patients is kind of why we do what we do. I can't, there's nothing better than seeing their reaction to being able to do something in clinic or their spouse seeing it happen or their partner, their friend, whoever's there. It's such a special moment. And it's not even, I can't even describe it. It's not even a conversation. It's like a moment of celebration, right? So, it's, a big thing that we talk about with our patients is we try to temper their expectations simultaneously going into it. Because as, everybody knows, whether it's a neurological injury or a physical, I tear your shoulder based injury, everyone wants to be better yesterday. And then, maybe they've tried everything, they've stalled, they're not getting better. They come across a really new, exciting program or in this case device or technology, and their brain jumps about 14 steps forward into what they expect is going to happen immediately. So the big thing that we always talk about in clinic is, to celebrate, those stepping stones. It's not about goals one, two, and three. It's goals 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, leading up to goal 2.0. And I think those are what's super special. And I think especially because we do that, that intensive first 2 weeks, we spend a lot of time with the individual. You develop a really cool relationship with them generally. And from there, you're celebrating along the way because every day compounds. It's really tough. It's not easy. It's probably, for most people, it's one of the harder things they've probably ever done. A lot of individuals, most really healthy, active individuals don't even exercise 3 hours a day anyways,
Hmm?
let alone someone who's now suffered a neurological deficit. Maybe they've been struggling with it for years, and we're not afraid to push their buttons.
Hmm?
So it's a really cool, active conversation as the program progresses because there's a lot of, as you maybe know, there can be a lot of psychosocial deficits or limitations that come alongside major life altering deficits, right? And so it's a constant organic conversation of, we celebrate these little things. It's going to be really hard. This is a really good thing. You should be proud. Like, and it's just building on those pieces, right? So it's a really fun time.
I love that you have that idea of, got milestone one and then milestone 1.1 and then milestone 1.2. So it's like the same milestone, but it's not about like just smashing it out and getting to the the goal, whatever it is. Like say it's I need to be able to run again. It's like, well, okay, let's change your gait. Let's watch your gait. Let's improve your gait. Let's improve the way that you walk. And then once you've done all the other improvements, it's like let's continue improving in that space rather than let's just get out there and start running. Um, I love that idea. You know what happened to me right now was you're describing how the PoNS works and then how you've decided how the organization has decided to start using it in for people for different things. And it reminds me of the conversation I had with a couple of the guys from a Viv Clinics and their hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And they have a room, a chamber, a massive chamber. It's like a room. You walk into the chamber, you sit down, and then they take that person through a hypoxic brain episode by increasing the oxygen level and then decreasing it to normal levels. The brain thinks it's going hypoxic, and you can really positively impact uh, the neuroregenerative part of the brain, feeling like when the brain goes hypoxic, what it does to kind of try and stay alive. And in that time, what they do is they ask patients to do different things depending on the deficits that they have. They ask them to stand up and sit down, or they might ask them to write, or use one of their um, affected limbs, etc. And the whole idea is to intervene right at that time in the same way when the therapy is being delivered. Uh, and I love that I'm seeing this pattern now, kind of in a number of different fields of therapy, and it seems like it's a real easy, well, easy. I'm going to use the word easy because I don't have another word, but a real easy way to manipulate in a positive way the the brain so that neural pathways reroute, find another way or whatever the word is, and then wire and fire and kind of stick is. Do I just am I describing it correctly? Is that what we're doing
Yeah, no,
today?
I think that's the best. I think that's the best description, right? It's putting the brain, in a new, almost stressed situation, learn with new pathways during repetitive movements, trying to lay down to learn a new thing, and from there, that brain is going to acquire that skill acquisition. It's no different. I always talk to people too about this because sometimes it's so funny because like with clients we they get frustrated because it's like why are we hammering this it's the same gait pattern over and over and over and over again and they lose their minds about it and I say it's no different if you walked up to a guitar you've never played guitar in your life every day you pick up the guitar are you going to go try to play a different song every day. No, I mean, it make no sense. You're not going to learn. You can't. If you're going to learn something, you have to be able to repetitively do it and learn it and constantly grow and build off of that. And I find that in therapy and even in exercise, this is even going to talk to like general gym goers. Everybody wants to be entertained. And I find that they need to do many, many, many all kinds of things instead of narrowing down and getting really good at certain stuff. And, that's no different than when it comes to physical therapy. In this case, neuro rehab is it's no, it's not circus, it's purpose. We're here. I'm not going to make you stand on one leg and jump up and down on a Bosu ball because Instagram told you it looks cool. There's no function. There's no reason you need to be able to do that. So we focus on the pathway itself, and it's repetitive. And we have to stress the brain to lay down that new pathway. And from there, that's how that brain acquires that new skill set. And then it
I'm
becomes natural.
going to test your pop culture knowledge and your age. It's wax on, wax off. It's paint the fence. Mr. Miyagi, he taught us in the
Yeah,
80s, mate.
Karate Kid. I'm older than I look.
It's Mr. Miyagi. It's like that whole thing. It's like, why am I painting the fence? Because Danielson, you have to paint the fence, mate. And then once you paint the fence a million times, then you'll have that flow in the hand motion to be able to block or to deflect or whatever he was teaching him to do with the karate
Yeah.
kicks, right? Um, and then, and if you haven't watched Karate Kid and you're listening to this podcast, go and get Karate Kid and watch it, please. And you'll learn something about neuroplasticity that Mr. Miyagi was telling us in the 80s that we didn't realize um, was actually a lesson on neuroplasticity. Is exactly what it was. It was amazing thinking back on that show, an amazing example of how you develop a something that appears second nature, how you develop it from doing it a long, long time. Driving is a classic example. I remember being 16 and getting my learner's permit and then trying to convince my dad for the next 2 years to let me drive every opportunity that I got. And I remember having this conversation vividly with somebody I used to work in. I used to work in a hardware store, and there was an older guy there. He would have been 28 at the time. And I was telling him how I was struggling driving. And he goes, yeah, you're struggling now because it's all new. You know, it's a big hunk of metal and all these things that you've never had to deal with before. But by the time you're 28, you'll be driving and you won't even think about it. And I remember him saying, like, you'll get somewhere and you won't even know how you got there because it's become second nature. And it's because of the amount of hours that you've spent behind the wheel retraining, you know, that part of your hand and your leg to work together and that part of your brain and your eyes and your ears to do all the things that it needs to do to drive a car and keep it on the right side of the road and make it look effortless. So um, I often think about that when I'm trying to um, get my head around how long something takes to really master it. And, you know, you hear the whole other reference to um, the 10,000 hour rule that to get become masterful at something, you have to spend 10,000 hours practicing it or doing it. And I don't know if we need to spend 10,000 hours to get results in stroke recovery, but the more hours we spend in a kind of lovely way, um, in a way that's not too many hours in a short amount of time, and it's not overstimulating the brain, and we are allowing for rest and recuperation, and we are allowing ourselves to have down days. The more time we do that, the more results we get. It's just impossible not to get a positive result by doing something like a physical therapy, whether you're doing it with somebody like yourself, Brody, or on your own at home. That's that's kind of been my whole little way to motivate people. It's like anything you do to help you walk better, doesn't matter how hard it is getting you a positive outcome. If you're not doing it, you're not getting a positive outcome. In fact, you're rewiring the brain in a negative way, in a way that's not supporting recovery of the thing that you want to recover. So um, I'm glad that we're having this conversation and that we can possibly open people's eyes to something else and another device uh, and another way to think about recovery. It doesn't have to be in the gym. It doesn't have to be necessarily in um, a clinical environment. It can be just by putting this thing on your tongue and standing there. You can YouTube Cheryl Schiltz and pull back your reader, and you'll find the original video that the team took when Cheryl first puts the device on her tongue and starts to rewire uh, her her balance, and then how it develops over time, and then how she goes from not being able to walk to being able to ride a bike, and then bragging about the fact that she's riding the bike while they're recording her on a car next to her or something like that, perhaps on another bike next to her. It's just a completely, it's an amazing thing that was it, that it was even discovered. And here we are now. Um, we're talking about 30 years later, and the PoNS device exists. I mean, it's phenomenal. I love this stuff.
Yeah, no, it's been, like I said, it's been fun. I mean, there's been so many just incredible client success stories and just again cool milestones, different deficits, every day is just so neat. And I mean, it's cool because every Friday we meet as a team and we always kind of do, client shout outs and we kind of round table and it's really neat because it's people are sharing such cool stuff with their regular patients obviously as well, but if there's someone in the door that's going through our ponds, it feels like every week we got something cool to share and they become connected to you, right? Like I still talk to a huge number of individuals who went through this program that, still check in with me all the time. I still talk to them. They still update me. They still come in every once in a while, still years later. And it's really neat. And there's always room to make improvements. And there's always room, your therapy just doesn't stop. I know it can be for a lot of individuals, it can be really tough, right? It's a big life change. Your life's upside down, things change, things are very difficult, and maybe you've tried various forms of therapy and recovery and things have been very limited, right? But I do want to let people know that you know, never don't be like always be hungry. I always tell people this too is, I get one of the things it's interesting is a lot of my patients come in and they get frustrated. The first week is really tough. The nervous system's on fire, they're exhausted. And again, they come in thinking that, they should be up here 3 days into the ponds program, right? And they're upset, they're emotional, and they started apologizing to me profusely, and I tell them like, don't apologize. I want you to be hungry. I want you to not be satisfied with where you're at because that's going to keep pushing you. The second, and it's cool because there's always one quote that's always stuck in my head. I tell all my patients this is it was an old ice hockey coach of mine when I was a child, and he coached me for years. And one of the things he told me is you need, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. He says the second you get comfortable, whether it's in sport, whether it's in life, in school, at work, or in a relationship, when you get too comfortable, things go sideways. And if you're always uncomfortable or something, an event or a situation is making you uncomfortable, you will grow from that and you're going to grow from it and it won't become uncomfortable again. And so I use that a lot with my patients. I go, if this stuff was comfortable for you and easy, you wouldn't be here. So I want this to be, if you're uncomfortable right now and this is tough, means we're growing. And that's how the brain grows under stress. The body grows under stress. It's eustress. It's good stress. And that's a big thing we talk about with our patients is, it's okay to be frustrated and want more because that's going to drive you. If you're always wanting more, you will get more.
Yeah,
So that's all. It's just being hungry, right?
I agree. I agree. Being uncomfortable is uncomfortable though, and you have to wrap your head around that it's something that you should look forward to. You should what's the word? You should get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Uh,
Yes.
it's hard to work it out, but once you are comfortable with being uncomfortable, then you're going to go into uncomfortable situations, and they won't be so traumatic, or they won't be so um, hard to do. I've had to do that with public speaking. You know, you have to go into a room, you have to talk, people have to, you have to get them engaged and make them not fall asleep. So you're thinking about that. There's only one way to do that. It's to go and test your particular presentation and to see where it bombs so that then you can refine it so that it bombs less the next time you do it. But you have to expect it to bomb a little bit. And that's even more uncomfortable in an uncomfortable situation when something bombs and you're already feeling icky and uncomfortable and things are hard and it goes bad. Well, you've got to just know that it's actually just part of the process. It's just part of the the way that you learn and that you fine tune your skill and you do those 10,000 hours. That's the way they are. All the 10,000 hours aren't beautiful and lovely and perfect. There's a lot of harsh, terrible lesson learning hours that you have to go through. Now, the people who got you and I together had, I would describe it as a few reservations as to whether or not they should um, take action and invest in a program of this kind because they've never seen something like that before. It's really strange. What are some of the things that people kind of have reservations about with this product, and how do you kind of try and make them feel okay about giving it a go and investing in it? Um, I'm not trying to do the sales spiel, but I am trying to sort of tell people that, all right, this may look weird, you may not understand it, um, but I also am the kind of person who is the like, don't knock something unless you've tried it. But that's not enough to convince somebody to use a device like this and to spend the money on it on the whole thing. So I'm just curious about that. How do we move people from being feeling like a little bit unsure to actually becoming somebody who's willing to try it?
Yeah, so obviously one of the big, I mean, I'll be very upfront. The biggest barrier we find, at least initially, is obviously it's a big commitment because there's a big cost commitment attached to that, especially if you're out of country. You got to fly here, you got to accommodations. Like it's not just a vacation. It's now you're committed into also a paid therapy program as well. So that's always going to be the first and foremost. I mean, that's always the biggest thing, no matter what. Even for people that are local here, to us in British Columbia, or just even local, just within Canada, is that it's obvious it's always going to be cost, especially in this day and age economically. Everybody's always got that top of mind. But out notwithstanding that, the next kind of thing that we find is again, it's just that unknown. I think, a lot of people who come to us that want to know more about pawns, thankfully, a lot of them have already done their due diligence. They already know, like, I don't have to not say waste, but I don't need to explain to them for 15 or 20 minutes what it is, or how it works. Most of the people come into us, they're like, I know exactly what this is. I just need finer details. Let's kind of get this going. But for the people that don't know what this is, and it's kind of a little bit more of a organic segue into it, it's exactly that. It's explaining to them because they don't sometimes they can't wrap their head around stimulating their tongue. That's going to make me do all these things. Or some people they find if they've kind of exhausted their therapy, so to speak, like it's been years and they've been struggling with it for a long time. They say they've seen everybody under the sun and they can't figure it out. They want to, well, how do I know? Again, circling back to the cost thing, they're going to say, I've tried everything already.
Mhm.
Why should I go do this? So it's sometimes, it's what I usually do with our patients, and so do a lot of our other therapists, is we just lay everything out very clearly. It's not we never do this as like a sales pitch. That's not how I approach that. It's I go, look, this is what it can do. This is how the program's structured. The end of the day, it's no different than them continuing to do therapy once a week or twice a week for a year would most likely be the same cost of what a really intensive 14-week program is going to be anyways when the dust settles. So I always map it out as it's an accelerated way to kickstart in a far more detailed therapy regimen. Is that's kind of how I supply it, and then I lay out, I'm give people data, I give people
Yeah.
studies, I show them videos. It's more just educating. Because a lot of people just don't know. It's very foreign, and I think when people fear the unknown, and if they don't understand it, the guards come up. And I
Yeah.
think that's just how this day and age has been too as well, especially with just the rise of misinformation or the rise in stuff circling through social media. Is There's a lot of content out there that is right,
Yeah.
wrong, garbage, false, manipulated. So if people don't understand, the guard comes up immediately. So we just try to educate them. We give them every tool and conversation that we need for it. And I would say the vast majority of the time they end up proceeding and we end up getting on with beginning.
Yeah. Sounds like it's just literally about making an informed decision, and hopefully
Absolutely.
everyone has a different time frame that gets them to pull the trigger or not, and that's
Yep.
okay, whatever that is. I mean, we've done exactly what I wanted to do today on behalf of two people who don't know whether they should use the product or not, whether they should go down this path. And that is, and what I've done is we've discussed all the ins and outs, the history, where it's at, how it works, uh, the applications. We've discussed that. So I think we've given people a whole bunch more information that they can consider and maybe help them make a decision about their rehab, especially the people who are early on, and all the stroke recovery stuff is overwhelming. Everything is overwhelming. And then I love that idea of also people who have perhaps been out of the system for a little bit and thought, I've tried everything, nothing's worked, I'm done for now. And then they stumble across this somewhere and they think, maybe I should give it a go. If you can manage it, I would encourage people to never ever look at ways to continuously try to find ways to improve your life, your quality of life, your function, your independence. Go for it. I mean, what do you got to lose? So, thank you so much for joining me and being so gracious and teaching us about the ponds and what you guys do. If people wanted to find out a little more about your organization, where would they go?
Yeah, so they obviously the easiest place. I can also include it in, I think we got a little chat box, so I can also send you some stuff.
Yeah.
But obviously our website, which is our neuropeak.ca, is going to be the best place to go first. It shows all the services our clinic offers in general.
Mhm.
And then from there, they can also see we've got a whole section on our ponds. And from there, they can reach out to there we go here. They can reach out obviously to us via that website. So we have our info email. Um, there's also my email as well. Where all our contacts easy to find via our website. We try to keep things very clean. Again, our goal is to not overwhelm people. We don't want to, especially, knowing our demographic and knowing who we work with, we don't need to make a system complicated.
Yeah.
So,
I love that.
um, obviously, also, they're more than welcome. Again, Pawns is a very public device now. They can Google it or whatever search engine they use to look through Pawns. There's lots of cool articles and stories, lots of testimonials. You'll see both via either link to our website or link to other news articles or lots of YouTube videos, especially with Montel, that they can follow along and learn a little bit more about it. But it's very easy to get access information.
I'll make sure that all the links are in the show notes anyway. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
No worries, no, I appreciate your time, Bill. Thank you for having me.
Well, that wraps up this excellent episode with Brodie Jackson. His passion for helping stroke survivors and his work with the Helius PoNS device is giving people real results and real hope, especially those who have been told they've plateaued or that recovery is no longer possible. From helping clients walk again to improving fine motor skills and even handwriting, the PoNS device is truly redefining what stroke rehabilitation can look like. If today's episode opened your eyes or to something new or reminded you that recovery never really ends, I encourage you to check out episode 200 of this podcast with Cheryl Schiltz, the first person in the world to use this kind of technology. It is so powerful, emotional, and enlightening, and it shows just how far neuroplasticity can take us. Please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below and share what inspired you most about this episode. You can learn more about the clinic that Brody is based at by going to neurospeak.ca, and I'll include all the links in the show notes we mentioned earlier. Finally, if you'd like to support this podcast, you can visit patreon.com/recoveryafterstroke. Every bit of support helps me cover the cost of the podcast and continue to bring valuable insights and stories like this to stroke survivors around the world. Thanks for being here. Until next time, keep going, stay hopeful, and remember, your recovery is still happening, one step at a time.
Importantly, we present many podcasts designed to give you an insight and understanding into the experiences of other individuals. Opinions and treatment protocols discussed during any podcast are the individual's own experience, and we do not necessarily share the same opinion, nor do we recommend any treatment protocol discussed. All content on this website and any linked blog, podcast, or video material controlled this website or content is created and produced for informational purposes only and is largely based on the personal experience of Bill Gassiamas. The content is intended to complement your medical treatment and support healing. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied on as health advice. The information is general and may not be suitable for your personal injuries, circumstances, or health objectives. Do not use our content as a standalone resource to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for the advice of a health professional. Never delay seeking advice or disregard the advice of a medical professional, your doctor, or your rehabilitation program based on our content. If you have any questions or concerns about your health or medical condition, please seek guidance from a doctor or other medical professional. If you are experiencing a health emergency or think you might be, call 000 if in Australia, or your local emergency number immediately for emergency assistance, or go to the nearest hospital emergency department. Medical information changes constantly. While we aim to provide current, quality information in our content, we do not provide any guarantees and assume no legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, currency, or completeness of the content. If you choose to rely on any information within our content, you do so solely at your own risk. We are careful with links we provide. However, third-party links from our website are followed at your own risk, and we are not responsible for any information you find there.